missions.
Degenesis Moloch is the second of 2 setting expansion books for the Degenesis role-playing game, published by SixMoreVodka in early 2021. The 2-book series is titled Justitian, named after the capital city of the setting's great northern bastion of civilization, roughly 500 years after an apocalypse. This book, Moloch, is essentially a list of NPCs who either live in or are drawn to the city of Justitian, for one reason or another. Moloch, by the way, is another nickname for the city. There are a couple of interesting caveats here. One is that each NPC is lavishly illustrated in typical Degenesis fashion, and the other is that, if read cover to cover, the NPC descriptions unfold a kaleidoscopic metaplot taking place within this city, one that you can insert your players into at any point. I've made a few videos on Degenesis at this point covering the 2 core rulebooks, the Rules expansion, as well as the first Justitian book, the Righteous Fist. In order to get the most out of this video, I suggest that you at least watch the Righteous Fist video before this one. And for maximum understanding, watch my video on the core setting book Primal Punk as well. You can also just watch this video first if you want and probably get a lot of what's going on. I do want to point out a few things about this video. 1. This is the second of a 3-video series, the first covering the Righteous Fist, a geographical exploration of the Protectorate and the major districts and zones of the capital city, Justitian. This second video covers Moloch, the compendium of NPCs in Justitian in the setting's year 2598. The third video will cover half a dozen booklets published under the banner of the Roadmap, a series of shorter setting supplements that both add to the playable settings and to the ongoing metaplot. These booklets are the final entries in the Degenesis RPG, as SixMoreVodka announced the game's end in October 2021. 2. This video will touch on every single NPC detailed in Moloch and will include spoilers of the metaplot that is slowly unveiled throughout the course of the book. Again, it might grease the wheels a bit if you watch my videos on Primal Punk and Justitian Book 1 first. And as usual, I'll add my honest opinion at the end. I'll spare you the executive summary of the Degenesis setting in this video. Needless to say, both Justitian books take place in the year 2598, 3 years after the start of the setting's introduction in the core books. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of competing factions, most of them vying for domination of the known world, which at this point only consists of Europe and Northern Africa. Justitian comes as a blood-red 2-book set, and in physical form it is presented in a glossy, gory slipcase. Both books are 300-page, stitch-bound hardbacks and sport heavy-duty covers. The paper is thick and filled with rich colors and dark blacks. When it comes to the physical products, SixMoreVodka has always tried to offer the best possible quality that they can source. Each one of their books has a lot of heft in the hand, and you can feel and see the durability, and they also just look really, really good. Since SixMoreVodka's announcement of the ending of the Degenesis line, these books have become very sought-after relics. I put a link below to their website so you can try your luck. The book only briefly touches on some general advice on how to run a game of Degenesis, detailing 6 different paradigms of conflict. It also suggests things you can do in-game in the city, just to get your group of players sort of warmed up for the main story arc of your campaign. I found it interesting that PCs get a mechanical bonus of one sort or another just for entering the city of Justitian depending on your cult. It's a temporary bonus that is lost once they leave the city.
Spitalians.
Some of the characters presented in this book are extremely significant in terms of the metaplot, and Kessler is one of them. He's one of the top Spitalians in the entire cult, the leading Hippocrat who oversees all Spitalian operations inside of Justitian. His immediate plans are to arrest Kranzler, the provost and top dog in the cult, because he thinks Kranzler has become too reckless and drunk with power. Kranzler is a battle-hardened leader who is credited with bolstering the reputation and the abilities of the Preservists, a warrior rank among the Spitalians. At the moment, he is concerned about a new form of human about to be born in Cairo, Homo Geantis. He has been secretly deploying Spitalians to the African continent in order to make some kind of ill-fated last-ditch offensive in order to stop that birth.
Kranzler.
One of the things Kranzler did was abolish a secret Spitalian program called Old School, where Spitalians were brainwashed into psychotic killers who followed orders. Pressler was one of them, and he has only barely recovered from his conditioning. He uses his bloodthirst as a very successful lieutenant in the wars against the encroaching clans, but he is a ticking time bomb.
Serval.
The preservist Serval is a bit of an odd duck in that he feels more at home with the more superstitious cults than he does his own science-minded brethren. He's actually a firm believer in the tarot predictions of the Apocalyptics. His current obsession is pursuing two female Spitalians, Parrot and Devant, who went missing in a failed expedition down in the far southwest corner of the Protectorate. He has tracked them back to Justitian, but doesn't know what they're after. Since he's addicted to burn, his sepsis load forces him to work without the help of other Spitalians. The hygienist Halkamp was the chief planner of the Great Cleanse, a violent purge of the burn trade in the city. The purge was a success and granted him a lot of bureaucratic authority with regard to hygiene regulations, but he's a petty, fragile person who has abused his power in the years since his peak and harbors dangerous ill will towards preservists who don't respect him. His oppressive hygiene regulations make his office the most hated in the entire city.
Joseph Haydn.
He was once the most respected surgeon of the Spital, but old age and a muscular or nerve disorder forced Joseph Haydn out of practice. He didn't take the development well, getting himself addicted to two types of burn to manage his condition. His secret addiction is fed by a crippled scrapper simpleton named Mendelssohn, and together they keep his secret, which would probably result in execution if he were discovered.
Elias Raymond.
Ramon is a Spitalian gone rogue, deciding to dedicate his talents and energy to helping the poor and woefully unfortunate of the city, rather than follow cult regulations. Since he has helped so many people at this point, they now protect him with their lives at his little clinic in the Bottomlands. Leadership among the judges also wants to keep him alive and safe, while elements of the Spitalians, including Elliot Halkamp, want him outright killed.
Dr. Masser.
Masser is the judge's brilliant coroner, who works in secret at the cemetery of the judiciary up in the northeast corner of the city. He has solved dozens of cases, large and small, by way of autopsy, but his real obsession is with a mystery involving a series of 22 clones and a very thin trail of evidence leading to the most dangerous gang of apocalyptics in the city, the Carrion Birds. Chvalsky is one of the several characters in the book whose unique possession is extremely rare or powerful, but they have little to no idea what they have. In this case, Chvalsky does have some sort of hunch about this horse medallion that he has had since childhood, that it has to do with a legendary marauder named Triglaw, but what he doesn't know is that it's a corresponder, a device that can possibly control or neutralize Triglaw. Any chronicler or paler would kill to have such a device. Inez Devant was obsessed with the Ferromancer King Marquerant even after it was defeated and thought to have been eradicated completely. She was given permission to muster 6 Famulancers to make an expedition to find more evidence that maybe Marquerant was still alive somehow. The expedition was a disaster, and a Famulancer named Parrot went missing for a year. When Parrot was rediscovered, she was highly infected with the primer and quarantined. Devant freed her and secretly followed her. Once freed, Parrot headed straight for Justitian. Once she had become separated from the ill-fated expedition, Parrot became not just infected by the spore of the Ferromancer chakra, but became imprinted and driven to return to Justitian to await the rebirth of Marquerant. She knows that Devant is tailing her, and in her new brainwashed mindset, has hired neighborhood defilers to attack and kill Devant if she draws too close. This poor soul was once a preservist, but fell victim in an encounter with Dushani. His mind was instantly enslaved to the chakra, and he became another servant. He was compelled to return to Justitian and resides in the shadows of the Defiler streets. His mission is to somehow figure out a weak spot in the Marauder Triglaw's defenses and free Eidolon, the living entity that is the embodiment of the Dushani currently trapped in a cage of Triglaw's design.
Chroniclers. Generation.
This chronicler is hailed in some quarters of his cult as an analytical genius, but does come across as a know-it-all. Politically, he has the unique position of being able to sit in on meetings of the judiciary, which he duly records and passes on back to the cluster. In terms of the governance of the city, he acts as one of the few checks and balance mechanisms between the judges, chroniclers, and Spitalians who share rule. Echo lugs around a portable over-the-horizon radar that can pick up signals from up to 1,000 kilometers away and does his spy work for his cult. But unbeknownst to him, he's essentially been brainwashed by the Hippocrat Kessler, who is using him to prepare to arrest fellow Spitalian leader, Kranzler. Also, Echo has come to realize on his own accord that someone in the city has hacked into a radio frequency reserved for judges and chroniclers.
Deselect.
The central exchange in the forecourt is a massive multi-warehouse bazaar where scrappers come to sell their artifacts and junk to the chroniclers and get new leads on more hidden caches. The chronicler with some of the best information on those caches is Deselect, an incredibly difficult, rude, but brilliant mind. His knowledge of underground chronicler facilities makes him a tempting target for the Palers who have infiltrated the city. Eliza is one of a few elite chroniclers who hunt and kill sleepers. It's said that there might be at least a dozen hiding in Justitian and hundreds across the Protectorate, each of whom was awakened in one dispenser or another and is hellbent on resetting civilization through some secret plan of theirs. Eliza happens to answer to a marauder named Aspera, a sort of patron saint of the chroniclers.
Hello.
Among the many high-level power struggles going on in the city, one of them is between the chroniclers and the scrapper super conglomerate known as the Cartel. They both compete for bygone artifacts more than anything. In this ongoing conflict, the chroniclers have devoted some of their off-the-books secret agents called Shutters to infiltrate, spy on, or otherwise degrade the Cartel. Alo is one of these unfortunate souls who kills for the chroniclers but receives almost no support and absolutely no protection from them. Load is a particularly unfortunate case of a Shutter with no support. He was caught in a defeat outside of the city and was so clandestine that there was no way for him to return to the cluster. All records of his existence are long gone, and at this point he hides in Tech Central, the domain of his cult's enemy, the Cartel.
Decoy 5.
Decoy is yet another Shutter who lives in hiding. He was once tasked by the chronicler Nullify to assassinate a fellow chronicler named Mirage. But once that job was done, in typical chronicler fashion, he himself was sentenced to disappear so that Nullify could cover his tracks. Now Decoy skulks around Justitian in a variety of perfect disguises, searching for payback.
Alias.
The high-ranking chronicler Fragment named Lambda was chosen to be the next bearer of the Alias helmet, a VR helmet that reconstructs a digital version of Justitian for the wearer that contains the entire chronicler database, with complete interactivity. A lot of what Alias, as he is now called, does is deflect hacking attempts and report suspected intruders to the chronicler's domain. There are actually game mechanics included in the book that detail how to overload Alias via hacking attacks to harm or even kill him. Impulse is responsible for possibly the greatest schism in chronicler history, having divided 16 high-ranking fragments from the cluster and sending them across the Reaper's Blow to be killed by a Jehammedan. 4 of those 16 fragments survived, and in the ensuing years created a splinter group of chroniclers called Needles. The betrayal also made an enemy out of the marauder Triglaw, who monitors Impulse's every spoken word. Impulse is in possession of a pocket-sized nuclear reactor called the Fulgar, which the Needles need to fulfill their own plans for humanity. But as with several other cases in this book, he's not aware of just what he has. Membrane was recruited by the chroniclers for his genius-level understanding of security and encryption. They employed his incredible knowledge to revamp their security measures across the city, but then tried to assassinate him once the upgrades were complete. They failed to kill him, however, and he was taken in by Nullify, a chronicler mastermind who needs Membrane's talents in order to execute some very high-level machinations. Nullify has been managing covert chronicler agents, the Shutters and Fuses, for a very long time, and treats the entire cult like just another instrument to achieve his ends. He discovered that the marauder Triglaw was alive before the Eschaton, and was in fact the one responsible for the enigmatic 2^16 virus that caused the stream to collapse moments before the meteor strike in 2073. He wants to destroy Triglaw and the Needles who Triglaw controls. To do so, he plays both sides, the chroniclers in Justitian against the Needles across the Reaper's Blow. They're just pieces on a chessboard to him. Corium is one of the 4 survivors of the betrayal that gave rise to the Needles, and just like the rest of them, he's after the power source needed to reach the so-called Ark of Jehammed and leave the planet. The book doesn't offer much more detail than this, but I'm sure if you jump on the Degenesis Discord, someone would be happy to explain it to you.
Hellvetics. Gustav Block.
Block has been serving as the Hellvetic ambassador to the Protectorate for 8 years and is bored to death. But recently, he started getting embroiled in Oswald Kessler's plans to arrest Provost Kranzler without even realizing it. Furthermore, he has been in possession of a Mickey Mouse pocket watch that he hates and doesn't work, but which secretly contains some very important information about the Marauder Triglaw's clandestine thefts and a secret network inside Hellvetic territory.
Bastille.
Bastille was running a low-level criminal operation at his border outpost in the Franken Alps and was about to get busted when he took an assignment in Justitian in order to clear rubble and guard the accident site at the crack. Now he finds himself drinking and carousing with Apocalyptics, who are playing him for the password to his power armor. They are hoping to take it off his hands and use it against a competing flock.
Paul Glouser.
Glouser oversees the reconstruction of the accident site at the crack, but since the Chroniclers have not been decisive about how to cover up the area, which could expose the existence of their underground rail network, Glouser is getting impatient and curious. It's been 3 years after all. He's begun to take steps to investigate the accident site further, but the Chroniclers can see every step he takes and are plotting for his untimely demise if Ambassador Block can't convince him to let it go.
Lucia.
Lucia is an agent of the Marauder Triglaw and does everything she can to advance his objectives. Currently, she is searching for a needle in the city, but is actually being misled by a high-ranking Jehammedan who is using an Ultratech communications device shaped like a ram's skull.
Judges. Arcot.
The Supreme Judge of Justitian is in the throes of dementia brought on by old age. Although he rules over the legislative and executive body of the Protectorate, a lot of day-to-day decisions are made by his advisors and by his most trusted ally, Rutger. His most recent accomplishments have only been to add fancy facades to the sides of buildings and finish a massive statue of himself at the entrance to Uptown.
Rutger.
Senator Rutger, the Old Wolf, is currently the most respected and competent leader in the judiciary, having consolidated elements of the cult and made it stronger. He has been able to repel countless attempts at assassination and blackmail, probably due mostly to the fact that he controls a secret order of preservists called the Black Judges, who operate completely off the books. He also leverages the cartel, the most powerful scrapper gang in the land, to keep pressure on all of his enemies. Rather surprisingly, his Black Judges have recently uncovered the fact that there was never a first judge, and that legend upon which the entire cult is based was completely fabricated by the Chroniclers to create the judges out of whole cloth. This knowledge gives Rutger the power to completely and utterly destabilize the Protectorate.
Senator Lacon.
Senator Lacon is a genius-level administrator and politician who has become fed up with the reckless governance of Arcot. He secretly builds up a political alliance against Arcot and has discovered that Arcot has a bastard son who is alive and in hiding. If he is able to find this person, then the fall of Arcot would be assured.
Leica.
Leica is widely known by another name, and she cruises around Tech Central with 12 battle-hardened Anabaptists enforcing the law. She is ruthless and ambitious, and like Senator Lacon, she wants the office of the Supreme Judge. She maintains the ultimate loyalty of her 12-man posse by sexual means, but their muscle power might not be enough to protect her as she gets closer and closer to the unholy alliance between Senator Rutger and the cartel.
Gregor Kant.
Kant is credited with devising the Cleft, a cruel prison labor camp in the city of Justitian itself. The camp has been a success in terms of keeping prisoners under control and generating cheap labor, but he has made enemies out of many scrappers who have been incarcerated there, as well as the Chroniclers, who think the Cleft is a security risk to the entire city.
Utrecht.
Senator Rutger is able to stay on top of a lot of different affairs because of his access to information, and a lot of it he gets from his eyes and ears in the city, Utrecht. Utrecht is a master spy, able to blend into any street or building and systematically memorizes every room he enters. He has become singularly obsessed with finding the Head Collector, a serial killer who hasn't been active in several years and has been thought by many to be nothing more than a myth.
Darius Messick.
The staffing of the judiciary is fed by 5 families, which are nothing less than dynasties at this point, and Darius Messick was born into one of them. But instead of basking in the life of privilege, he started a second, secret life in Fielding under an assumed name, where he has impregnated his mistress and is finding his lies closing in all around him. Interestingly, Messick has discovered a devastating truth about the judges in his old family archives, that an old supreme judge named Lythor was actually found not guilty in his trial, but whose records were tampered with by the Messick family and led to Lythor's downfall. Exposing this discovery could lead to the destruction of his house, at the very least.
Emil Salvano.
Another of the judicial dynasties is the Salvanos, which happens to be the most powerful of the 5 families at the moment. Emil is a Machiavellian schemer who aims not only to take the seat of the Supreme Judge, but to ensure that only Salvanos ever hold the office in the future. He ceaselessly does favors for other cults in order to win their favor and ultimately win the highest position in the city's government.
Aretha Mantefel.
The Mantefels are another one of the 5 families. Aretha, in her youth, made the bold move of relocating to the far-flung city-state of Bergamo and marrying the scion of another powerful family associated with the Neolibyans. She has returned to Justitian and works with her husband to suppress the rights of Anabaptists in the city, and aims to eventually found a protectorate city in Purgare in order to expand the Mantefel family with powerful foreign alliances. Kerber is a short-tempered executioner for the powerful commissioner Levantus, and has always enforced the law without mercy on both the cartel and the carrion birds, the 2 top gangs of the Scrappers and the Apocalyptics, respectively. More recently, Levantus has forced Kerber to partner up with a talkative assessor named Carolus in order to investigate a case of corruption in the ranks, and the pair could not have been more mismatched. Carolus has served Commissioner Levantus for 14 years, using his incredible abilities of observation and retention of knowledge to collect evidence and investigate crimes. Unfortunately, he's also a bigot who espouses xenophobia and what he calls traditional values. The pendant around his neck is actually an old citizenship badge, which is now viewed as a symbol of oppression. His partnership with Kerber on a new case is not a welcome job development.
Levantus.
The hardened Commissioner Levantus was on the verge of retirement when one last case landed on his desk. A distraught woman approached him, claiming that her husband, a judge named Arkville, had gone missing, but the judiciary had no record of an Arkville. Levantus soon discovered that there were 24 judges who had gone missing from the books, and has begun to suspect the existence of the Black Judges, Rutger's best-kept secret. The Black Judges can't simply disappear Levantus, not just because of his stature in the cult, but because he has now brought formidable help onto the case in the form of Assessor Carolus and Executioner Kerber. Estrelle was impregnated against her will by an agent of the Ferromancer chakra, and she secretly brought to term a baby that was in fact the Ferromancer King Marquerant reincarnated. Although she was able to return to Justitian and to her regular duties as a city judge, her mind is completely obsessed with finding the baby, who she named Metis. That was soon taken away from her in the middle of the night by some other gross Ferromancer creature. In her almost mindless search for the child, who appeared to be perfect and beautiful, she has enlisted the aid of the mother of orphans of the city, Jordis. Together, each night they prowl the defiler streets and have aroused the suspicions of those who watch, including the preservist Serval. Wortman is a brilliant lawyer and rhetorician who can outlitigate anyone in the city, and despite his extreme distaste for any kind of religion, a trait that has earned him the nickname the Heathen, he doesn't hesitate to represent anyone who has a case before the bench, since he truly views all to be equal in the eyes of the law.
Black Mary.
Not too long ago, there was a bloody rebellion brewing amongst the judges, with the so-called reformists planning to turn back time and make all the laws much more brutal and swift in their execution. That movement was quashed, but Mary was plucked from the purge by Rutger, who converted her into one of his black judges. Now she kills for Rutger, but also secretly protects the rogue Spitalian, Elias Raymond. Rutger doesn't want to see Raymond killed for political reasons. Ivanov is another of Rutger's black judges, a ruthless killer who now leads the Secret Order with only the barest direction from Rutger himself. He is the epitome of a soulless enforcer, with stashes of weapons and gear all across the Protectorate and a long list of victims. He participates in illegal pit fights just to feel some semblance of pleasure, but that indulgence puts him at risk of being exposed for what he is and who he serves.
Clanners. Atama.
Despite his appearance, Atama is a man in his 50s, the beneficiary of growth hormones that he devised himself in his family's old apothecary. He occasionally fights in the pits and is actually the champion of the cartel, but his real passion lies in exacting revenge against the Spitalians for causing his father's untimely death. Most recently, he has become involved with a clanner named Cinnamon, and they share plans to poison a whole slew of high-level officials, as well as bomb multiple critical infrastructure points in the city. Cinnamon lost her family to the judges and has organized a secret terror cell in response. Her grand plan is to poison the heads of the 5 advocate families, bomb the uptown elevators as well as the aerial railway leading to the steel monolith, and maybe set the city on fire all on the same day. The elevator bombing would be done by her personally in a final deadly act of vengeance. Even members of the 5 big families have to take an entrance exam in order to become a member of the judge cult. If they fail that exam, they are sloughed off to do administrative work in the offices of Uptown. This is where Derev finds himself, scrupulously examining every person who applies for citizenship. He keeps copious records on every applicant and forwards anything suspicious up to the protectors and advocates for further investigation. The fertile farm belt around the city called the Rubble is home to a massive population of overworked, underrepresented farmers and food producers, who all find in Adran a single voice. Adran represents them to the judges, chroniclers, and Spitalians, and tries his best to gain allies amongst the other cults. Negotiations for better rights and conditions for the farmers remain tense, and Adran finds himself preparing for armed skirmish with the authorities. Springer is a highly decorated firefighter in the city. He doesn't care for all the awards and medals. He's deeply concerned about the city's lack of water allocation to fight fires, and sees the city as a powder keg waiting to burn to the ground. Most recently, he has been seduced by Cinnamon, who has tricked him into revealing all of the city's areas most vulnerable to fire. He has no clue that she's planning to use that information in the worst possible way. Vukadlak was once in line for a position of supreme leadership in the Balkan, as a so-called voivodul, but it was not to be. He relocated to Justitian and holed himself up in a walled mansion in the city as a rich eccentric. The judges have tasked him with domesticating the wild mutant dogs called Gendos, but all he has managed to do is train them to guard him and only him. He has so far kept that failure a secret from the judges, but eventually they'll find out that Gendos don't make for good police dogs. Anyone branded as a tainted one after being found guilty of the most heinous of crimes is doomed to a life at the bottom, doing stuff like shoveling human waste, handling corpses, or in the case of Belmondo, catching feral rats. He's mostly harmless these days, but has unwittingly gotten caught up in a deadly obsession. Not too long ago, he witnessed with his own eyes the head collector. He identified some unique features of the serial killer and is obsessed with finding the killer now. He thinks by doing so he will be able to escape his miserable station in life. He is also very dumb. This poor soul's earliest memories are of tearing away from some sort of grotesque breastfeeding situation and running out of a dark house guarded by a judge. He was able to escape to the streets of Justitian, where he was taken in by the defilers. He has the underdeveloped mind of a feral child, but his heritage is one of the most important in the city. He is the legitimate son of Supreme Judge Arcot, and was hidden away at Arcot's orders by Senator Rutger, and whose discovery could upset the entire political order of the Protectorate. In the year 2598, the Protectorate is in the midst of the clan wars, and one of the clans rising is the Cockroaches. Sisma is one of them, a scout who has somehow infiltrated the city in disguise, looking for weaknesses in Justitian's defenses. Her clan has already found a way around Siege's defenses to the south, where they plan on scorching farmland and causing chaos before a full-scale invasion. Elite Spitalians obliterated Vrakul's clan despite him being a named champion. He barely survived and wandered the lands for over a year before stumbling upon the city of Justitian. He entered the city with a burning desire for revenge, but he doesn't quite know who within the cult of the Spitalians he's supposed to exact his revenge upon. The head of the Ogota family is a master of steel, and his family has been living in the steel monolith for generations, in captive luxury. He has 2 problems personally. One is that there is no descendant worthy enough to pass his knowledge down to, and the other is that he is at odds with the other steel master family of the monolith, the Gotokai. He thinks that both families should be content living in the monolith, while the head of the Gotokai thinks that they should have freedom from their gilded cage. Heza, the Grand Master of his family, wants to be able to roam free, and recently he has found a way to do it. The Chroniclers have secret passages into dozens of places around the city, and one of them is the steel monolith. Heza discovered this entrance and has secretly rigged a way to be notified of the next time a Chronicler enters. When that moment happens, he will overpower the Chronicler and make his escape. Incidentally, some of the Steel Masters are able to come and go at will, one of them being Caleb Ogota, who leaves the monolith to gather raw supplies and materials. He prefers the company of scrappers over his own family, since they are not hung up on myth and family legend. Most recently, he has become good friends with the one named Cinnamon, who has not only gotten him to divulge the routines of the aerial railway, but has convinced him to smuggle her into the steel monolith as a visitor at some point soon. He has no idea what she's planning.
Furhat.
For whatever reason, Furhat began exhibiting murderous psychopathic tendencies in the monolith and was eventually banished. He found himself in the employ of Bosch, the leader of the cartel, and now finds himself a ruthless Grim Reaper for the biggest scrapper gang in the Protectorate.
Lurin.
The Numancers were a clan born of the slave master Meccans and now have their own foothold in the region. Lurin represents the Numancers as their herald or ambassador in Justitian, and the city officials shower him with booze, women, and even the rare and celebrated creature known as a beagle. Justitian needs the Numancers as allies in the clan wars, but they also need to make sure that Lurin doesn't drink himself to death and trigger the exact opposite of an alliance.
Scrappers. Bosch.
Due to his stature, Bosch is known as the Dwarf King. Over the last 30 years, he has created and operated the cartel. He is a high-level political player who courts and jousts with the judges and Spitalians and has carved out Tech Central as his own piece of the city. His empire is built upon protection rackets, illegal events, pit fights, undocumented labor, money laundering, murder, and anything else not dominated by the Apocalyptics. The clans who hate him most cannot touch him, since an assassination would create a power vacuum that would cause more problems than it would solve.
Buto.
Buto is Bosch's numbers guy and confidant, monitoring all cartel cash flows, managing officers and goons, and paying out bribes to judges. He also manages a lucrative illegal fighting pit operation that is structured into yearly seasons. All the fights are rigged, of course, and the final matches of the season are huge cash producers.
Argan.
The doomed soul known as Argan flaps around outside the city walls looking for anything important or suspicious to report to the cartel. He has a couple of issues. One is that he fashions his personal appearance after a bird and makes quacking duck sounds. The other bigger problem is that he claims to everyone he meets that he's more important to the cartel than he really is. This happens to be a pet peeve of Bosch's, and thus Argan's days as a scout are numbered.
Ashma.
Ashma is a spy for the cartel who is in possession of a very special device that allows her to listen in on private radio communications in the city. Bosch has put her deep undercover in the forecourt, posing as a metal workshop owner, but her cover story is falling apart with the locals, and the chronicler Echo closes in on her frequency.
Ike.
Ike is permanently down on his luck, having never made a big find as a scrapper and forced to eat fungus and birds' eggs to survive. His luck might have changed when he stumbled upon a seashell that contained the memories of the Ferromancer King Marcheron's past life. But the moment that the Ferromancer presence in the city finds that he's in possession of the seashell, they're not likely to pay him a fair price for it, to say the least.
Steelbeam.
Steelbeam is one of 3 brothers, the so-called Bear Brothers. 2 of those brothers were betrayed by Chroniclers, specifically by the scaler Nullify, and killed. Now he seeks revenge, and has entered the city like a tour de force. He has allied himself with Atama, the guy who concocts the growth hormones and reigns supreme in the fighting pits, and has networked with Cinnamon and her terrorist cell for weapons and explosives. Notably with Steelbeam here, his modified Cockroach King Club has a damage rating of 17, which is quite high.
Decker.
The Mechanist Decker has one of the most important jobs in the city, of maintaining the massive lifts that transport people to and from Uptown, which sits on a plateau in the northeast corner of the city. His most recent assignment has been to build a crane platform at the Crack, where chroniclers are desperately trying to keep their underground network from being exposed to the other clans. The Hellvetic Glouser has convinced him to rappel down into the Crack itself and have a look around, and this is about to force the chroniclers to take drastic, deadly measures to maintain their secret. In the city of Justitian, a new, undetectable kind of primer-based drug called broiled or liquid burn has taken root. Dawn is a junkie who not only abuses this drug, she has found herself trafficking it to new parts of the city on behalf of the cartel. Unfortunately, this makes her a carrier of the sepsis, and her trafficking efforts threaten to spread the primer far and wide enough to cause an existential crisis for the capital city.
Bumblebee.
Bumblebee is credited with launching a renaissance of scrapper innovation and invention in the city, and is personally a master-level inventor. He is highly valued by the judges for his knowledge and is constantly being courted by the cartel leader Bosch, as well as throngs of young would-be apprentices, all of who want to benefit from his immeasurable knowledge and genius.
King Cockroach.
King Cockroach is neither king nor cockroach, but rather another poor scrapper who never seems able to even find a shred of good luck. In his case, he's an inventor with nothing but failed ideas. The one accomplishment he has achieved recently was to set up a honey farm, but even that was quickly subsumed by the cartel, and now he just produces valuable honey for them at very little profit to himself. Incidentally, he is a wealth of information regarding rumors in the city.
Sorrow.
Remarkably, in the entire city of Justitian, there's just one gas-powered car, and the scrapper named Sorrow owns and operates it. She makes high-priced deliveries with it and is extremely well-liked in the community. She is also especially well-liked by the Neolibyan Dewe, who secretly subsidizes the petrol needed to operate her motorized buggy. Recently, she was asked about the possibility of delivering multiple letters to the heads of all the advocate families in a single day, but she doesn't know the reasoning behind such a request.
Yordis.
In a city filled with darkness and misery, Jordis stands out as a beacon of mercy and hope. She runs an orphanage that continues to grow and get renovated, and the children in her care grow up in a reasonably safe and protected environment. Unfortunately for her, the cartel leader Bosch wants to utilize the orphans for his own crime empire and plans on buying the orphanage right from under her feet. And perhaps even more unfortunately, Jordis bore witness to the birth of Metis, the reincarnation of the Pharomancer King Markarant, and now searches nightly with its mother, Estrelle, to find the lost baby. They're both under its pheromonal spell, thinking it's the most beautiful and important baby in the history of the world.
Hostin.
One of the orphans under Jordis' wing, Hostin, has grown into a budding inventor, but has to face the fact that he's an outcast among other children due to his prosthetic. Nevertheless, his penchant for remote-controlled surveillance devices puts him on the shortlist for Chronicler recruiters, who have an exact need for such a thing, and they probably couldn't care less about his missing a leg.
Mendelssohn.
Mendelssohn was never very clever, but he finally found a purpose in his life when he began sourcing burn for the fallen from grace Spitalian surgeon Heidal. Things took a turn for the worse, though, when Burn was purged from the city, and Heidal kicked him down a flight of stairs in a rage after he lost a bag of money. Now Mendelssohn lives in a neck brace, and hopes to secure liquid burn for his master in the hopes of getting on his good side once again.
The Cartographer.
Reminger, or the Cartographer, is the greatest map maker and map collector in the entire Protectorate. His massive collection is priceless, and Chroniclers and Neolibyans feud over access to them. Most cults would benefit from the maps, but they are probably most valuable to the Palers, who could use them to find the remaining dispensers in the Stukov Desert and awaken their Hollowed sleepers from cryogenic slumber.
Xander.
Every scrapper's dream is to dig up an artifact so valuable that when they go to sell it to the Chroniclers, they are handed a giant duffel bag full of cash. That happened to Xander, who immediately started spending his cash like a drunken sailor. This ended up causing him a lot of problems by attracting the wrong kind of people. Eventually, he had to go into hiding, carrying nothing but the bag of money that he never even bothered to count. The artifact that he found, in fact, triggered the Needle Corium's return to Justitian, and has also triggered the Headhunter's ire.
Neolibyans. Wakili.
Wakili has come to Justitian to create an alliance with the Protectorate and establish trade routes connecting Borca to the capital of his empire, Tripoli. Meanwhile, Kranzler has begged and pleaded to allow Spitalian passage to Africa to set up a beachhead ostensibly to fight against the Psychovore scourge that plagues that continent. Wakili's agreement to allow Kranzler passage has allowed him and the Neolibyan merchants in Justitian to receive citizenship papers, much to the chagrin of the Chroniclers.
Begide.
Begide, daughter of a powerful magnate in the Neolibyan Empire, took matters into her own hands when it came to the most notorious pirate organization in the Mediterranean, the Sunflock. She seduced one of its envoys, gained all of the Sunflock secrets, and proceeded to annihilate the entire operation. But that envoy, Arco, as well as the leader of the Sunflock, Volko, were able to escape. Years later, she got wind of them operating in the far-flung city of Justitian and immediately set out with a top Scourger from her house, Mbeke, to travel to the city and hunt down the two pirates.
The African.
Dewe, who is known simply as the African in the city, almost immediately figured out how he would make his fortune when he arrived. By catering to everyone's need for low prices, he built a personal empire on cheap soup, recycled jewelry, and flimsy toys made by orphans. Everyone underestimates him, and his wealth continues to grow as he expands his range of cheap products.
Scourgers. Mbeke.
Bejide chose him to travel with her to Justitian and hunt down the last two remaining pirates of the Sunflock, but he despises the city. In fact, he hates all of Borca. But recently, he has found a friend to party with in the Hellvetic Bastille and has started to dabble in burn. He has also met a fellow Scourger named Gakoki, who for some reason doesn't want to share anything about his past.
Gakoki.
Gakoki was on the verge of finishing his hero trials and becoming an accepted warrior for his cult, but he failed, and then he decided to run. He eventually found himself in the city of Justitian and came under the employ of the Chroniclers, who hired him to infiltrate the Neolibyan embassy and siphon off information from Wakili. One thing led to another, and now the Chroniclers want him to poison the ambassador. In Chronicler fashion, they intend on disposing of Gakoki himself after the deed is done.
Anubians. Atonke.
Members of the spiritual Anubians are rarely found in the city of Justitian, but Atonke has been drawn to the city. He has seen signs that a powerful psychonaut has been reborn here, not knowing that he has picked up the scent of the Pharaohmancer King Markarant. No fewer than 4 elite Spitalians, as well as henchmen of the carrion birds, each follow his trail and intend on getting in his way. They don't realize that he has discovered a mother spore field that has already taken root in the middle of the city.
Jehammedans. Baruch.
The leadership of the Jehammedan quarter is fractured into 3 parts: the traditionalists with their Abrami council, the nobility of the descendants of Osman, and the radicals who want war and follow the herald of Ares. Baruch represents the first of these 3, the iconide of his people whose spirit was broken after witnessing the judiciary unjustly execute their former leader. He is powerless and irrelevant in the wake of the ascendancy of a teenage girl named Carmel.
Carmel.
Carmel was born into what can be described as Jehammedan royalty, and it is expected that she take the helm of a powerful family, but she is still young and completely inexperienced. On paper, she is expected to rule over the Jehammedan quarter and represent the cult to the rulers of the city, but she has a lot to learn about the ways of politics and of adolescent lust.
Fatim.
Fatim runs a bathhouse that is so successful and well liked by the judges, they suspend their prejudice of Jehammedans just to enjoy his company and his services. He is extremely well regarded in his community, but harbors a secret sex addiction that he feeds each night at the harbor. This has, of course, led him to becoming blackmailed by the Apocalyptics, and now he has to feed them as much information as he can gather from his customers, or they'll expose him to his community for who he really is.
Naraka.
Naraka represents a subsection of Jehammedans who follow a figure named Ares. He is imbued with nanites, like all of his rank, and wears a high-tech helmet disguised as a ram's head. He came to Justitian to carry out the will of Ares, which is apparently to prepare Jehammedans for a bloody rebellion. In terms of personal combat, Naraka is loaded to the gills with attacks and abilities that make him a boss battle you probably can't win.
Apocalyptics. Vulko.
Vulko is one of the 2 Sunflock pirates who narrowly escaped Bejide's purge. He and his partner Ptolemy violently carved out a piece of the carrion bird's turf in Justitian, the dry-docked den of iniquity known as the Flotsam, and started a new flock they called the Dust Riders. If it all happened in a vacuum, the Dust Riders would have been destroyed long ago, but since they are enemies of the carrion birds, they are friends of the scrapper crime lord Bosch and his cartel, and that affords them protection.
Ptolemy.
Ptolemy manages the face of the Dust Riders, interfacing with judges who come by for inspections and plying them with dazzling relics and strange libations. At a deeper level, he's always balancing and managing the flock's best interests, trying to appease rivals where he can, and keep some semblance of peace. When he's nervous, he fiddles around with an old coin that he got from somewhere. Little does he know, that coin is the first dinar ever minted by the Neolibyan merchant empire, and is worth more to them than he could ever imagine.
Vadim.
Vadim is Volko's lover and ruthless bodyguard. He's also a mute who speaks the language of knife violence anytime the situation demands it. Now he just lives to serve Volko and the Dust Riders on Flotsam.
Argus.
Argus was the one responsible for the downfall of his pirate clan, having divulged its secrets to Begide in bed. But when he and Volko escaped to Justitian, no one actually knew it was he who was responsible. Now that Begide and her champion Mbeke have arrived in the city looking for him and Volko, it's clear that his big secret is about to be exposed. He now considers a bargain with his sworn enemies in Justitian, the carrion birds, just to receive protection.
Darwin.
Darwin is the Dust Rider's appointed poisoner and nothing short of a full-blown psychopath all his own. He hangs out with Atama sometimes, the clanner who makes his own growth hormone, but he's far crueler and more sadistic. It was actually Darwin's poison that allowed his pirate brethren to seize Flotsam from the carrion birds, as he was able to poison 40 of them simultaneously and make it look like a mass suicide. The judges couldn't have cared less who died as long as the Flotsam kept paying its taxes.
Mother of Ravens.
The Mother of Ravens, as she's now known, didn't just establish and control the most powerful apocalyptic flock in the Protectorate, the carrion birds. She actually started the whole apocalyptic movement before the Eschaton 5 centuries ago. She pitched the idea to launch this hedonistic social movement to her lover, Jerome Gatrell, the founder and mastermind of Recombination Group, and he let her go forward with it. They went their separate ways back then, but flash forward 5 centuries and here she is, using the supernatural powers of her son, a biokinetic, to extend her own life indefinitely.
Joshua.
It's not clear if the Mother of Ravens meant to give birth to a biokinetic, but she did, and she named him Joshua. It worked out well for her, and she keeps him cleaned of his plague bugs and tightly contained so that he can't overwhelm his captors. And every so often she feeds him a live human, usually someone who has betrayed the carrion birds in one way or another. He absorbs their life force and from time to time transfers that force to his mother, so that she is able to live just a bit longer. Recent developments have rattled Joshua's cage a bit, since he now hears the call of Markarant, and it's possible he will finally be free.
Dejan.
Dejan is another of the Mother of Ravens' offspring, one who tended to fail at one post or another. The final straw was when he lost a duel and ended up losing control of the Flotsam to an upstart new flock of former pirates. For this, his mother took his left hand and told him he would need to retake Flotsam no matter what. None of the carrion birds actually want to help him achieve this, so his next best goal is just to take his mother down, and his plan to do that is to sneak underground and dispose of his brother Joshua. He figures that if he does that, his mother is finished.
Hector.
Hector juggles 2 jobs mainly. By day, he is the public face of the carrion birds and has an incredible knack for misleading investigators and keeping his own tracks clean. By night, he disposes of corpses in a variety of creative ways, but he also masterminds a lot of the flock's criminal activities, keeps the judges bribed, and protects his magpies from outside abuse.
Jade.
Jade is an assassin spy who works directly for the Mother of Ravens and is completely devoid of a soul. Instead, she has personas, which she uses to impersonate whichever kind of person she needs to be to infiltrate and spy for the flock. As far as what's going on with her face there, she uses flesh masks supplied to her by Joshua, and she has hundreds of them. She's entirely a Frankensteinian monster, complete with a second beating heart that was implanted in her chest, and glands and organs that give her superhuman strength and agility.
Lupo.
Lupo was once a legendary pit fighter, but a sudden affliction of acute impotence has made him into a very insecure, but twice as fierce time bomb. He would do anything to get his mojo back, and Dejan, the fallen son of the Mother of Ravens who lost the Flotsam, has promised him that if he drinks the blood of Joshua, he would totally get his mojo back.
Danka.
There was once another very successful gang of apocalyptics called the East Wind Flock, and they dealt in burn. But after the Spitalians carried out the Great Cleanse, Eastwinders like Danka had to find a new flock. She found the carrion birds and has done well enough monitoring brothels for them, but she wants nothing more than to exact revenge against the Spitalians for her flock's demise. The only lead she has to work with is the head of the Office of Hygienics, one by the name of Elliot Halkamp.
Darling.
Fez started off as a very ambitious member of the carrion birds who thought that one day he would rule over the flock, but to his surprise, when he formally requested a duel in order to gain the ultimate position of power, he was instead locked in a dungeon and tortured to the point where he would be a gimp-like example to anyone else who harbored the same ideas as he once did. They call him Darling for irony.
Ivy.
Ivy was the snitch who aided the authorities and brought down the East Wind flock. They relocated her and gave her a new life as a jewelry seller in the Anabaptist district. And her biggest problem these days is that her boyfriend, Gosler, a timid ascetic, appears to be sneaking off each night to a shed on his farm in Fielding. She's determined to find out just what's going on there.
Phoebe.
Phoebe was there when a revolutionary new drug was devised in Ferropol that could replace burn, but was not detectable by Spitalians. Those were the days of the Splinterhawks in Ferropol, and those days came to an abrupt and bloody end. But 13 years later, Phoebe has set up a new laboratory in none other than Ferropol, and has started distributing the stuff yet again under the resurrected name of the Splinterhawks. She does this through a tenuous network of dealers and defies the carrion birds in an increasingly dangerous game. Ezra became disillusioned with the carrion birds and their leadership structure and ended up in league with Phoebe pushing liquid burn. Now he acts as both her captain as well as a spy inside the carrion birds' operations. He vies for alliances with the Dust Riders of the Flotsam and even the Cartel, in a daring attempt to afford the Splinterhawks some semblance of protection with their budding drug empire.
Anabaptists. Samuel.
Samuel is a living legend among the Anabaptists, who fought in several major battles and still holds the title of the representative of Cathedral City and Justitian. But the fact is, he's a living fossil, and a reminder to younger Anabaptist warriors that perhaps the best days of the cult are behind them.
Uriah.
Uriah follows Samuel around as a sort of personal assistant, even though he is an accomplished warrior in his own right. Unfortunately, he is mocked for his role and unleashes his drunken frustrations on anyone who slights him.
Gosler.
Gosler is but a simple farmer who had the misfortune of coming upon a battle-wounded 600 sleeper named Beryl. Beryl had woken up way too early, and his memories were completely scrambled, but he did have enough wits about him to mimetically coerce Gosler into tending to his severe wounds each night in a shed on his farm in Fielding.
Markesh.
Markesh is one of Lyca's Anabaptist 12-man posse. They all want to clean up Tech Central, but Markesh wants to rush in and do it quickly. He has locked his sights on Bosch's numbers guy, Buto, and has sized up the bookie as an easy target. But Buto is several steps ahead of Markesh, to the point where they've already even decided how they'll dispose of his body.
Hailers. Mishichi.
This old dog is part of a horde that has infiltrated Justitian's secret underground railway and holed themselves up there. He's been able to make forays to the city's surface and assess the weak points of the Chroniclers' security systems. He wasn't able to pull it off alone, though. His horde has been receiving help from Corium, a needle who hates the Chroniclers as much as the Palers. If all goes well, his horde will be able to get into the Chroniclers' data core and retrieve the location of all 44 hidden bunkers, each of which contain the de facto gods of the Palers, the Sleepers.
Creta.
Creta is another of the horde fortified under Justitian, one of about 90 Palers. He has already cracked the Chroniclers' security network and uses it to spy on them in search of more critical information. He has discovered that the central cluster is home to a massive collection of valuable bygone artifacts, one that he feels they have no right to possess.
Vesna.
Vesna's life in the Hasos bunker went from bad to worse as 400 Palers began a bloody war amongst each other. Whatever you might call life for a Paler was completely shattered by her 7th birthday, and when she started exhibiting signs of the commanding voice that only demagogues are blessed with, she knew she had to flee. She raided the bunker's weapons and supplies, and took a group of about 100 Palers with her across the Alps. Eventually she found Justitian, and she knew that her job would be to infiltrate this central cluster and take what is rightfully hers. She's still relatively young though, and doesn't realize that the needle Corium is only helping her horde for his own reasons, and that he plans on disposing of them all when he gets what he needs.
From hell. Beryl.
The 600 sleeper Beryl woke up in a daze, and before he knew it, a crazed chronicler named Eliza was shooting at him and managed to get a nanite inhibitor embedded in his flesh. He limped his way to a farm and, just by instinct, was able to use his mimetic protocols to get the farmer to help him recover in safety. Slowly, his memory returns to him, and he recalls emerging from one of 3 dispensers in the Stukov Desert. If he can find his way back, maybe he can wake the others and see through this master plan for humanity that's been inserted into his head.
I guess it matters.
So it turns out that the reincarnated Ferromancer King Markarant, Metis, is not super adorable. That impression on his birth mother and her midwife Jordis was just a product of pheromones to make them think that. Nevertheless, he's with Itis now, and they hide away in the depths of Justitian trying to conjure up a bug plague. It took a few weeks, but ants did finally arrive, bringing fresh spores with them from outside the city. Those spores have taken root in the standing sewage of the city, and now a blanket of white mold promises a new mother spore field.
Trice.
Trice is a sleeper from the 300 Cascade, who has not let go of a war that transpired over a century ago. In the City Wars, the Protectorate turned on the city-state of Exalt and drove their supreme commander Coltrane into hiding. She has not forgotten the defeat, and still spends her time trying to resurrect Exalt and also kill all marauders, among other things. Her intentions are far-reaching for the region, and as complex as she is deadly.
The Head Collector.
Coltrane, as the warlord leader for Exalt during the City Wars 115 years ago, was on the verge of a new world order, one in which he would erase the mimetic protocol of the Sleepers, eliminate the marauders, and usher in a rebirth of the human race. But he was intercepted by the Mother of Ravens, and with a tempest of mimetic protocols, his mind was shattered, his army disbanded, and his empire dissolved overnight. All that was left of him was a husk of a man, a mere servant of the Mother of Ravens who stalks the streets of Justitian and kills anyone who she thinks is getting too close to triggering the mechanical resurrection of Exalt. A scrapper named Xander accidentally removed the power supply to Exalt, the Fulgar, and sold it to the Chroniclers. Now the headhunter is after Xander, the person who destroyed his last chance at restoring his mind. Alright, so here are my thoughts on Degenesis Justitian Book 2 Moloch. An official story. I struggled with this a bit on the first Justitian book, and it definitely comes up here again where there is a compelling story being told, and I wonder as a GM where it's acceptable to alter the story at one's table versus adopt what's being written as immutable canon. Like I mentioned before, I wouldn't personally have any qualms with changing the metaplot for my own players, but doing so drastically enough creates a branching alternate Degenesis universe that is not shareable with other Degenesis fans. That's my only real concern with this style of RPG setting presentation. Here's what I really love about this book: the story. If you start at Primal Punk and read each Degenesis book forward in a linear manner, you'll see a number of huge mysteries being presented. But once you get to this book, even though it's a compendium of NPCs more than anything, you're actually given a number of keys to those mysteries. But more than the thrill of bombshell reveals, you're reading a coherent story told in the form of usable, stat-blocked, fully illustrated characters. It's a riveting story about humans, superhumans, monsters, and the paranormal, but it all still comes down to dark human themes that didn't die off in the apocalypse of 2073. Greed, ambition, betrayal, prejudice, desperation, all on display on a massive continental tableau. Playable hooks. Once you've personally settled the question of which parts of the canon you will and won't tinker with at your table, the book is still sitting there packed to the brim with more story hooks than your players could ever unpack. This is also true of the first Justitian book, The Righteous Fist, but in Moloch, each of the hooks is deeply personal and spans half a dozen distinct conflict themes. The art. It's not fair to say that art always matters in tabletop RPGs, but the Degenesis books, and this book in particular, did make me ponder quite hard about how much it can matter. I've never quite seen anything like this, where every NPC, large or small, in a book is given a jaw-dropping artistic treatment. I can't deny that it animates the descriptions and the story being told in a very vibrant way. The metaplot of Degenesis is bizarre and original, and it's really too immense for you to ever tell it in any other medium like a graphic novel or a written novel. There are just too many factions and moving parts. But by presenting the story in the broad strokes format of an RPG setting book, you can cover a ton of ground while still having the right to include huge swaths of zoomed in detail. And yet, it's a story that exists just to enhance your own story. All the realistic details of the city, to the dozens of personal tales unfolding simultaneously in every quarter, are all just set dressing meant to inspire you. At least that's how I see it. Alright, that's all for now. Make sure to watch the last video in the series where I tackle the final 5 supplements published for the Degenesis RPG. We'll get to see just where the metaplot takes us. Thanks for watching. See ya.